A content warning for discussions and descriptions of eating disorders and spoilers for the Game Changers series by Rachel Reed up until the end of The Long Game. People are being mean to Shane Hollander and I will not stand for it. About 7 months, or however many more it takes to finish this video, ago, I tragically fell victim to a parasitic being that burrows its way into your cerebral cortex and permanently alters your brain chemistry. It puppeteers the host into doing actions incredibly out of character, like going out clubbing when normally you're the kind of person who brags about spending a weekend at home, or actually writing and publishing fanfiction when your usual MO is being a lurker extraordinaire, or watching Saturday Night Live. This parasite's name, Heated Rivalry. So suffice to say, this show and its subsequent explosion onto the pop culture landscape has kind of taken over my life a little bit. And I say that about a lot of the things I'm into, but I swear this time it's different. I've had hobbies, I've had hyperfixations. This has got to be psychosis the way it's on a whole other level. And as a part of my succumbing to Heated Rivalry psychosis, shortened in the scientific community to HRP, I read the 6th book in Rachel Reed's Game Changer series, and Shane and Ilya's second book following Heated Rivalry, The Long Game. This wasn't something I planned to do. Actually, I really wanted to go into the second season of the show the same way I did the first, completely blind. But eventually I realized even if I didn't read this book, I would slowly but surely have its major plot points spoiled for me just by trying to engage with the fandom online. Scrolling on Twitter, here's some fan art of a spoiler. Browsing on AO3 with a million different tags to try and filter out anything post-book 2. Too bad, one slipped through the cracks. So I caved, and I read the book, and I don't think this needs to be said, but I'll say it anyway. Y'all, this book's really good. But I also saw, when I eventually rejoined the fandom space after having finished the book, some very interesting discourse going on. Even some of the diehard fans who absolutely love these characters have expressed that they get a little frustrated with Shane in this book. And to be honest, I totally see what they mean. I think the peak of it for me was near the beginning of the book in chapter 5 when Shane and Ilya are at Fabian's concert and you have the sharp juxtaposition of Ilya dying inside with Shane getting horny. Kinda seems like maybe there's some unaddressed issues here. But too many people, I think, know this but don't think about it that much. Shane is a very internal person. And this is where my defense begins. The creator of the Heated Rivalry TV series, Jacob Tierney, has talked at length in interviews about how important it was to find an actor to play Shane who could portray subtlety with their acting, because so much of what goes on with him is internal.
Shane doesn't talk a lot, and I wasn't going to make him talk a lot, because that was not part of who he is. And so he had to express a lot of things physically.
We know this, right? Because Hudson Williams is a good actor who portrayed this in his performance. We see just a peek of how there is so much going on inside him that he chooses not to or is unable to verbalize, simply because that is how he operates, due to a mix of nature and nurture. He is, to the public eye, a private and reserved person, which is a part of why it's so lovely to see his inner witty self get dragged out by mostly Ilya, Rose, and Hayden when he becomes comfortable with them.
I really like you, Shane. You're secretly one of the funniest guys I know.
But let's go back to that nature versus nurture bit for a second. Is Shane like this because he's autistic? To a certain extent, probably yes. Is Shane like this because he was raised by David and Una to be polite? Probably also yes, to a certain extent. But what I really have to stress is that Shane is also like this because it's how he's been conditioned to behave in order to be accepted. There is a line early on in The Long Game that comes from Ilya's internal monologue that I think flat out is incorrect. Not because I think Rachel doesn't even understand how her own characters would act. No. Rachel knows them perfectly because, of course she does, they're her creation. Walk with me for a minute here. Ilya thinks to himself, Shane looked confused and uncomfortable. Hockey had never made Shane sad for a minute of his life. Ilya couldn't pretend to know how it felt to be let down by the game he loved, not in the way Max or Ryan had been, but he was more aware of hockey's flaws than Shane was. Now, I do not believe for a moment this is true. I completely believe that Ilya in this moment thinks it's true, and I think maybe even Shane would believe so, but it is not the reality. Shane is a person of colour in a sport and league that is historically dominated by people of Caucasian descent. Before I do go any further, at this point I do want to acknowledge that I am not a person of colour or neurodivergent, so I cannot speak with any authority on the lived experiences of those who are. That's not what this video is. This is simply observations on how I perceive the justifications for Shane's actions in this book as an outside observer. I am the invasion, but all that qualifies me for is being real bad at eating spicy food. In the TV adaptation of Heated Rivalry, we get confirmation from Shane that being half Japanese did influence how he was treated growing up playing hockey. Sometimes indirectly, simply through hearing his fellow players make fun of an entirely different kid just for being Asian.
He hated me though. I have a Western last name, so it's like the other kids kind of forgot to make fun of me.
The show doesn't go exactly into what kind of language or actions we use to do so, but I grew up in a predominantly white town in the early 2000s. I can say with a good level of confidence, probably nothing good. That kind of environment affects you indirectly, even if you don't realize it. You are being told by the world that if you want to be accepted, you have to not be this thing. And so you probably try to hide the things about you that mark you as other, which might work, but can also mean you're not living authentically. You do this for long enough and it becomes your new normal and stops being something you actively think about doing. It's second nature. In some cases, in their lengths to separate themselves from their otherness, people can go to the other extreme and engage in self-hateful behaviour, making fun of what it is you're trying to mask before someone else can. A perfect example of this is the character Troy Barrett, who appears in the Game Changer series in the books Tough Guy and Role Model. Troy was in a secret relationship with Adrian De La Cruz, a male movie star for many years, but still joined in with his teammates in using homophobic language in the Toronto locker room because he's projecting. It isn't the concept of gay people he dislikes, it's actually himself. He hates that for reasons outside of his control, he is this thing that means he will inevitably lose his father's respect and will make his life harder in so many ways. That, my friends, is called self-internalized homophobia. And don't you think it is more than likely that someone who is already used to having to mask to fit into the hockey world and then realize they're gay on top of that would engage in similar self-destructive and avoidant tactics? Are you seeing where I'm going with this yet? If not, don't worry, because I'm gonna keep hammering it home even more. But basically what I'm saying is Shane is a completely unreliable narrator for the majority of this book when it comes to how he is treated by the League and his own mental state. We don't get to see Shane coming out to his team in the long game. By the time the book starts, we are told it has already happened off screen. And until the latter half of the book, where Shane and Ilya's relationship is revealed to the world, we see very little of how his interactions with his teammates might have changed as a result of this. In fact, the only real acknowledgement we see of this development is in several scenes between JJ and Shane, where JJ is mistakenly under the belief that Shane has a crush on Ilya and so is trying to set him up with other people. But it has to be pointed out, JJ is Shane's closest friend on the team after Hayden, proven at the end of the book when he is the only other Montreal player to come to Shane's wedding after stuff has gone down. How did the rest of the Voyagers react to the news? We don't really ever see. Obviously they don't react well to the news that Shane is together with Ilya, but the way that scene is written seems to be trying to imply that their problem is more with the fact that it's Rosanov, their longtime rival, rather than Shane actually seeing a man. They then go on to accuse Shane of intentionally tripping on the ice to let Ilya win, proving either they never really knew Shane because that competitive ass boy would never lose on purpose, or they disregarded that fact because they wanted somewhere to direct their anger. So the question has to remain, are the Voyagers as an organization homophobic? Was the way they treated Shane covertly motivated by personal prejudices? I think probably yes, simply because the fictional MLH of this world, paralleling the NHL of the real world, has not yet managed to foster a widespread culture of tolerance. We see throughout Rachel Reed's Game Changer series, the language used in the locker room and when chirping on the ice delves into straight up casual homophobia. Even if the Voyagers aren't the kind of people who think that being queer is a sin or not natural, they're probably also not going to any pride parades or going out of their way to shut down that kind of language when it comes up. In the case of the book, their silence speaks volumes. JJ being the only person to openly acknowledge Shane's sexuality might indicate that it has become the elephant in the room that they're all avoiding in hopes that it just goes away on its own. Maybe you see it through smaller actions, like them ever so slightly angling their body away when they're in the shower stall next to Shane, in worries that he's checking them out. Maybe conversation becomes stilted as they go to make a chirp but cut themselves off halfway as they realize Shane's in the room and they don't want to be annoyed by his nagging. Maybe they stop going to him for advice on their plays like they used to, even though he's still their captain, because without even realizing it, their respect for him has diminished slightly ever since finding out what he is. Homophobia doesn't have to be loud for it to affect people. Living every day in a tense environment where it feels like people are walking on eggshells around you or giving you a 2-meter berth is its own kind of demoralizing. But if this was the case, why wouldn't Rachel include scenes like this? I don't know. Publisher deadlines, word constraints, the art of nuance. My personal belief surrounding the answer to this question is based on a public sentiment I've seen in different places online. That where Heated Rivalry is Shane's book, The Long Game is Ilya's. Obviously we get both of their point of views in both, but there is an argument to be made that Heated Rivalry is more about Shane coming to terms with his own sexuality, and The Long Game is more about Ilya's battle with his mental health. This is somewhat reductive, but when you think about how much of the word count of those respective books is dedicated to those topics, there is logic to the argument. So then, if The Long Game is Ilya's book, it would make sense that not much time is dedicated to how Shane's team is doing. Late-breaking update. In an interview with Swoon, Rachel revealed her logic for not writing Shane's coming out scene was that she had already written Scott Hunter coming out to his team in her first book, Game Changer, and she felt it would be too repetitive doing a similar scene again. In regards to Shane's team's reaction, she said, "Everyone's just not interested in really talking about it. Kind of like, it was there, it was known, but nobody was going to ask about it, except for maybe his best friends on the team. So I was pretty on the money." But unfortunately for Shane, and us readers who have to just sit watching as this unfolds, that's not where Montreal's failures end, because Coach Theriault isn't satisfied with being quiet. I actually don't know how you pronounce his name. No, in Canada there could be a French pronunciation, but there could be a French pronunciation. It's one of those words that I've only ever read, so I've actually no idea.
Theriault.
"This was one f***ing game," Coach Theriault said in his usual gruff, humorless tone. "We got a long season ahead of us, so let's not start jerking each other off just yet." There were murmurs of solemn agreement from the players in the locker room. Shane nodded along with them, agreeing with his coach, but wishing he could have used less homophobic wording. After nearly 30 years of a life in hockey, though, Shane barely knew what counted as homophobic anymore. Keep in mind, this is after Shane has come out as gay. Coach Theriault has at least some understanding of what he's doing. This does very much confirm my theories, though. Change starts from the top, and in this case I'm not referring to the captain of the team, who arguably is already trying to instill change by coming out in an environment that is nowhere near guaranteed to be accepting. I'm referring to the coach, who is technically a more senior figure and can bench players at will. I'm referring to the management and owners, who would happily sign off on hiring a coach that would use language like that. And Shane, having grown up, already being a different kind of other that is always to be made fun of, even if not to his face, is clearly all too used to this. He may not even see it as a problem that needs to be addressed, which would explain why it never comes up in the story. He simply keeps his head down with the mantra of, if I play good enough hockey, no one can suggest I don't belong here, and maybe hopes that with enough time they'll see he's still the same person. And we see this drive and anxiety manifest clearly in Shane's eating disorder. It feels rare in popular media that we see EDs characterized as anything other than a female character who is obsessed with trying to achieve an unrealistic beauty standard by losing weight. And that is one of the ways that an eating disorder can manifest, but it's not the only one. Controlling your diet to the point of obsession is often a symptom of a lack of control felt in other aspects of your life by the affected individual. If you're in a situation where you're powerless to change the bad thing that makes you unhappy, it can feel cathartic to have even a small thing that you can have control over. In Shane's case, his lack of control over how his team are behaving differently around him in the wake of him revealing he's gay has led him to start restricting his diet to only things that fit within a certain restrictive box of healthy, under the guise of improving his hockey. This kind of eating disorder actually has its own name, orthorexia nervosa. Thank you very much to my friend Sonia for telling me about this. Orthorexia is defined on PubMed as Obsessive focus on healthy eating, as defined by a dietary theory or set of beliefs whose specific details may vary. Marked by exaggerated emotional distress in relationship to food choices perceived as not healthy. Weight loss may ensue as a result of dietary choices, but this is not the primary goal. As the definition points out, the problem with this kind of behaviour is that it increases your emotional distress, which is very much the case for Shane. If he were to allow himself a cheat day here or there, or be more casual with following his diet plan, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But Shane Hollander doesn't really do casual. He's an all or nothing kind of guy. This means an act as simple as going out to dinner becomes a source of anxiety, because what if they don't have anything I can eat? I can't not order anything, but there's also nothing on the menu that suits me. It also becomes a point of contention between Shane and the people who care about him. Several times throughout the story, Ilya and others bring up his eating habits because they're worried he's engaging in self-destructive behavior. Which he is. It gets to the point where the thought of eating something he's not supposed to makes him feel ill because he feels like he's failing. But Shane is insistent that he does it so that he can continue to play hockey at the highest level for as long as possible. This is where we see just how closely Shane's self-worth and his ability to play hockey have become entangled. Also, it only gets mentioned lightly in the story, but Shane and Ilya used to cook together as a couple's bonding activity, and since Shane started this diet, they had to stop and lost one of the few routines they had as a couple for casual communication. That sucks. An issue that Shane struggles with throughout this story is that he's very inflexible when it comes to plans. Because of the way his brain works, he likes to come up with a plan and then follow it to the letter. He doesn't allow for unaccounted variables to change his course and doesn't know how to pivot when a plan is no longer working because of them. He has a diet plan, so he has to follow it. Him and Ilya set up this plan to only come out after retiring, so they gotta follow that. Meanwhile, Ilya is becoming increasingly unhappy because he's constantly hiding a part of his true self. And even if he doesn't know it, Shane is too. His unhappiness is just expressing itself through his eating disorder. That's why I don't like it when people say Shane is a worse person in this book, or that all the problems in his and Ilya's relationship rest solely on his shoulders. He makes mistakes by not considering and prioritizing Ilya's feelings, and he acknowledges this. But to say that Ilya is suffering while Shane is loving life is incorrect. His team might be winning games, and he might not have depression, but him and Ilya both are suffering under this self-imposed isolation that they unknowingly signed up for when they resigned themselves to staying quiet about their personal lives. Ilya doesn't think hockey has ever made Shane sad because Shane himself has never acknowledged the hurt, never recognized it for what it is, until it reaches a breaking point. When the Voyagers question even his hockey skills, the one thing he's used to relying on to prove his worth, by suggesting he threw the game on purpose. I'd now like to direct your attention to a line near the end of the book that at first glance can seem unremarkable, but is actually very important. Ilya was trying not to get his hopes up about Shane joining him on the Centaurs. Shane loved Montreal, and it would take more than a few stupid editorial pieces and angry tweets to make him leave. I myself glossed over this line the first time I read it. Then I finished the book and realized something. This line happens, we see no further confrontation between Shane and Montreal, and then he signs with Ottawa. If Ilya is correct in his assessment, and I think he is, that means things had already reached a tipping point. If for Shane to actually consider moving, he would have had to have been having the worst time, then he already was, and Ilya had no idea. He must have had no idea, because him saying he wasn't going to get his hopes up means he didn't think Shane would go through with the transfer. But he did. Take that information in, ruminate it on a moment, consider all that I have said throughout this video, and tell me if you still think Shane had it easy throughout this book, that he didn't do enough. There are several moments of juxtaposition in the long game that can feel like they're highlighting how unhappy Ilya is versus how happy Shane is, because to a certain extent that is their intention. Rachel is trying to showcase how Ilya's depression is creeping up on him, and this is an effective way of doing that. But these brief moments do not preclude Shane from also suffering. I would imagine Shane will only realize how bad things truly were with the Voyagers when he feels their absence in Unrivaled. When Shane feels the embrace of Ottawa and notes the differences from everything in mundane daily chatter to how the team shows up in support of him and the partner he chose. When he keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop, only to realize it's not going to. Shane just went from a team where he was the only out queer man to a team with 3 out queer players, a bisexual head coach, a gay social media manager, and 1 closeted baby gay player. Shout out Luca and your cancelled solo book. Rest in peace. Let's just say the energy is gonna be different. And I for one can't wait to read it because Ilya and Shane both deserve to be happy after the bad things they both went through in the long game. The 2 of them, both of them, equal amount of distress. You hear me? Now don't you ever let me catch you bad-mouthing my boy again. For anyone wondering why I'm wearing a plain white t-shirt for this, yo, I don't know if you can see it. Shout out Jellyfish Cakes, I believe it is. I'll put the ad on the screen.